Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Civil War Museum's interview program, Coffee and Hardtack. My name is Doug Dahman, and I'm the educational coordinator at the museum. With us today is Claire Herhold. Claire has done a tremendous amount of research on Robert Gould Shaw and the 54th Massachusetts, and is also currently pursuing her Ph.D. in history with a concentration on public history and interpretation at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, a place that's near and dear certainly to my heart. Claire, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah. Claire, I wanted to start out our conversation about your background. How did you get interested in history? And then how did you come to decide on this is something that I want to base my career on?
That's been a long road. My parents just say that there was never a time that this wasn't what I wanted to do, that I kind of came out of the womb obsessed with history, and my parents genuinely have no idea where that comes from. My dad is a person who I think loves learning about anything, and history is certainly something he enjoys, but not his great passion. And my mom pretty actively hates history after some run-ins with bad history teachers in school. So I was just always kind of this little alien mystery child who loved history. A lot of it probably came from the fact that my parents always used to vacation in the summer on Mackinac Island. That had been a place where my dad had been in the scout camp and a scout program there, and my parents had gone there as a young married couple. And so they took me as a kid. And so seeing, Fort Mackinac and the living history interpreters there, I really kind of fell in love. And my mom says that at 3, I told her, this is what I want to do. But I had no idea what that looked like, right? I mean, I think a lot of people love history, and it's a great passion and a great interest, but the career path is certainly not terribly clear. At 9, I answered a newspaper ad for docents in our local history society, and was certainly something I always loved. I definitely had wonderful teachers growing up. I don't think I can name a single bad history teacher I ever had. I really was quite blessed in that regard. And I always thought that I loved kind of 18th century revolutionary history. And then in 8th grade, I had a teacher who really kind of made me fall in love deeply with the Civil War. And that really became my first kind of passion in history. But going off to college, I went to Saginaw Valley State University here in Michigan, and get my map of Michigan out. It's located right here. And I signed up to be a secondary education major, because I didn't know what you could do with history besides teach it in a high school classroom. That was the only thing I had ever really seen. And slowly came to discover different career possibilities outside the realm of high school education. Starting in high school, I started working as an interpreter in the summers. So I worked, I'm from the Flint area, and I worked at Crossroads Village and Huckleberry Railroad in Genesee, Michigan, as an interpreter in high school. And then throughout college and into graduate school, I worked as an interpreter on Mackinac Island, where it all started for me. And so that was kind of how I started to learn that public history was a thing, and that might be something I wanted to pursue. And at the same time, in college, I was in the honors program, and as part of the honors program, we had to complete a thesis. And I had several faculty members, pull me aside and say, you could do something really ambitious with your thesis. And I was lucky enough to get paired up with Dr. Paul Teed there, who teaches their Civil War curriculum. And I had mentioned that since I was 13, I'd kind of had this fascination with the 54th and with Colonel Shaw after watching the movie Glory in class. And he really encouraged me in that, encouraged the research questions that I had, and particularly encouraged me to apply for a huge grant. Saginaw had a program, I don't know if they still do, but called the Student Research and Creativity Institute. And I was able to be awarded several $1,000s from them to actually go to Harvard University at 20 and to read through Shaw's original letters and correspondence. And I think that, my first time doing archival research and then writing the thesis and presenting the thesis at a conference and defending the thesis, I think was the first time that I was able to picture myself potentially as an academic historian, and that was an option that was open to me. So, I kind of realized in college that I didn't have to be a high school history teacher, that was still something that sounded appealing in some ways, but that maybe wasn't the best fit for me, but that there were other career options that I really had no idea, because I didn't know anyone who did that work or saw what it looked like.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting that for so many people that we encounter, that we talk to in the history field, or just even people who come to our museum and kind of consume the Second Friday lectures or these coffee and hardtack programs, their parental involvement is so important, isn't it? It's like, for me personally too, it was going to different Civil War battlefields, going to Gettysburg with my parents in the summer, that as parents, and maybe even as grandparents, I don't think you shouldn't underestimate your power in getting your younger people, your kids, interested in this. And the best way to do that is to take them places and experience what we would call public history at a National Park Service site or a museum. Over and over, you hear that is when my interest in history was started, kind of like planting seeds.
Absolutely. And I can't say enough good things, particularly about my mom, for someone who really had no interest in history, and yet just how she was always like, how can I support you? What do you want? Where do you want to go? What books do you want to read? And my poor parents, my last summer before I graduated high school, they said, this is your last summer at home. You get to pick our family vacation. Where are we going? And I said, every Civil War battlefield in the Eastern Theater. and bless their hearts, they said, okay, let's go, And I always say too, I think that my mom's support and involvement is probably a huge reason that I'm a public historian, and that I was very much drawn to history education, was trying to figure out how do I make my mom understand what it is about this thing that I love so much, and particularly knowing that a lot of her distaste had come from bad history teachers, and realizing, the power of that communication and that relationship and that educator. So I can't say enough about my parents' support of my career path, even when they didn't always get it themselves.
Yeah. So the PhD is a concentration in public history. Can you tell us a little bit about the process that's involved in getting your PhD? What sort of research is going on? What are your sources? And then defending it. How does that all work? And who will you defend it against? Are you looking forward to it? Scared to death? What's the next step?
Yeah. So the PhD is kind of the penultimate or the ultimate degree in history, when that's kind of as far as you can go. And it's certainly not something that is required if you want to be a public historian. Generally, for public historians, our career standard is a bachelor's or a master's degree. That's usually the ultimate degree for public historians. And so that was how I first came to Western. I finished my bachelor's degree in history and English in 2010. So I came to Western in the fall of 2011 to start my master's degree in public history. From years of interpreting and also doing some collections internships in museums, I had discovered that public history was the route that I wanted to go. So I came here for my master's degree. And then again, I had every plan in the world that was going to be it, right? That's what I needed to work in public history. So we were going to stop at the master's degree. And started listening to colleagues and reading. And again, I was coming in fresh with this experience from being a living history interpreter. And that was something I was really passionate about. And I just thought, like, well, everyone's going to be equally as excited about what I'd done in living history. And I found quite the opposite, that there kind of is a sizable amount of academic prejudice against living history museums, of it being, maybe a little hokey, a little focused on nostalgia. Maybe it's just playing dress up. Maybe it's less serious. And I just thought that doesn't jive at all with what I've been doing for the last, 6-7 years of my life. And and saw this gap in the literature about living history from the perspective that I was coming at it from. And so I thought, well, if I go out and I get a museum job, you know, I know what that's like. I won't have time to write and research, you know, that's just not an option. I'll be doing the daily work. And so I thought, well, a PhD would be time to research. It would be an opportunity to research. And I would also, you know, be leaving with those 3 little letters after my name that might encourage someone to listen to me who maybe otherwise wouldn't, you know, someone who will only listen to a PhD. And so I thought maybe I could do that. And so I started applying to some different programs, and Western continued to be a good fit. They knew my work. I had good relationships with the faculty here, and they were willing and enthusiastic to support me in that. So our program, you know, I'll speak to what the Western Michigan experience is like, but it is, every program gets to set their own requirements for the PhD. So every different university and different history department, it's going to look different, and what the requirements are going to look different. And I should also note that it is drastically different to get a PhD in history than a PhD in English or chemistry or psychology. I mean, every program looks very, very different. Probably one of the biggest differences is that a history PhD is long, is very, very long, where you might be able to finish another type of degree in 2 or 3 years, maybe 4 or 5 years. A history PhD typically takes between 6 to 8 years, and that's considered pretty speedy. And that, again, that's just the PhD alone. So you're doing that after a master's degree and after a bachelor's degree. So it's quite a lot of school. Generally, our PhDs are 2 years of classes. So you're taking classes at the graduate level and classes that you share with master's students. They're not terribly different. You might take some independent studies with faculty members that really focus on what you want to study. Our 3rd year is taken up by exams. So the point of your exam is really to prove that you have mastered the literature in your fields. So here at Western, we have 4 exam fields. So I had 4 faculty members on my exam committee, and they each assigned me a reading list according to the topic that they were guiding me in mastering. And those reading lists were typically 30 to 40 books, 10 to 20 articles. That was generally what they were. And it was my job through that year to master those reading lists. Generally, they were things I had read with them in the course of taking classes with those faculty members, but some of the things were new according to, you know, topics that we had discussed together. In more traditional programs, and historically what the exam process looked like was that you would be kind of locked in a room for an afternoon and need to write an essay about one of those reading lists, incorporating the material from the reading list. Now, Western is doing our exam process a little different, where I had many months to craft these essays. So they were also then expected to be much longer and much more rigorous. But the idea is to prove that you've mastered what's already been written, because then what's coming next is the dissertation. And the important thing about the dissertation is that it needs to be something original. So you have to prove that, like, I know everything that's been written on this topic, and thus I also know that no one's written about what I want to write about, that it is a contribution to the knowledge of the field. So after the exams comes the prospectus, which is basically a proposal saying, this is what I want to do. This is why it's important. This is why it hasn't been done before. These are the sources that mean that I think I can do this. This exists. This is the funding I'm going to go after to do it. And this is the end result that I'm hoping for. And then you have to defend that in front of your dissertation committee, which is different from your exam committee, although there's usually a lot of overlap. But your dissertation committee is the group of faculty members who are going to oversee the production of the dissertation itself. And so you defend it in front of them with a short presentation. There shouldn't be any surprises because they've read your drafts of it before and offered you advice. But the defense is an opportunity for them to say, you know, hey, I'm concerned about this. Have you thought about doing it this way? it's a very intimidating process, but the point of it is not to be intimidating. The point of it is to make sure that you're going to be successful, that you've kind of discussed any potential roadblocks and that you have a plan in place.
Yeah, it sounds like
and then once you pass that,
it sounds like more mentoring and coaching rather than, trying to, beat the idea into the ground or tell you that it's not a good idea, but they can give you some advice and source work and things like that. So more of a mentor relationship, which is, I think, great.
Ideally, I mean, there are definitely horror stories out there where it's not that kind of relationship, but I've been very lucky in that it has been a very supportive process. And then the dissertation, and then you're kind of cut loose and off to dissertate on your own. And then through all of this, you might have other responsibilities depending on if you were offered a funding package. So I've been very lucky here at Western. I had a 5-year teaching assistantship offered to me. That was my funding package. So the first couple years of my dissertation, of the PhD, I would have been assisting a professor with a course, although I was very lucky at the time to serve as a fellow at a museum in the area. So I was having, instead of being a teaching assistant, I was having more hands-on experience in the museum field. And then once you reach your 3rd year, you become an instructor on your own. So I've also taught for several years as an instructor here. And then when my teaching assistantship ended and I, ran out of the 5 years of that, I was able to serve as the vice president and chief financial officer of our graduate student organization here on campus, which is a shared governance organization. It's kind of like the student government, but for graduate students kind of thing, which was great. I did that last year for a stipend and for my tuition to be taken care of. And then this year, I'm quite grateful that I've received a dissertation completion fellowship, which is a fellowship that's available when you're in the very last push of the dissertation, and it's money that you can sit at home in your bunny slippers and write, and nobody distracts you, and you have no other commitments, and it's an opportunity to really buckle down and finish the dissertation.
Well, it sounds like an incredible process involved in all of this, and I think it's really educational for our viewers to hear this from someone who's in the midst of it, because I think we've all encountered historians or gone to lectures or read books by Ph.D. historians, and maybe we just don't understand the process that goes into it. So I thank you for sharing your personal journey with us. I want to go back to the challenges of public history versus academic history. What did you find so appealing about public history? I certainly have my own thoughts on it, what I love the most, but I'd love to hear from you. What do you like most about doing the public history now that you've had both a taste of teaching at a university level, but then also doing that kind of boots on the ground, doing first person interpretation at a site? How do you equate the both? What are the challenges involved in each one, and what drove you towards the public history realm?
That's such a great question. I know I always get a lot of raised eyebrows when I say I'm a public historian. People say, as opposed to a private historian, what do you mean? And really, it's that difference between academic and which is very focused on your activity within the university. It's usually very research driven, although sometimes at a teaching university, it may be more teaching driven. But the idea of academic history is that you're talking to other academics and you're pushing our knowledge of the past forward. You're asking very difficult questions. You're able to be supported in research that may take years, that may be very very niche, right? You're trying to fill in these gaps that we have in our questions about the past, and I think that is incredibly valuable. But for me, again, I think it goes back to a little bit of a rush that I always got with my mom. When you see that light bulb click on for someone, when you see that it starts to matter, that you're seeing those connections made. I think for me too, there was always this question of a usable past that comes up for me when I think about whether I prefer to be a public historian or an academic historian. Academics get very nervous when we start talking about a usable past, and for good reason, because I think when you're searching for an understanding of history that feels useful for the present, that can really change the questions that you're asking. And sometimes it can also skew the data that you're using. It can skew the results that you get, right? Maybe if you're looking for a particular answer. And so academics, it's very much a part of their call to be to attempt to be more objective and to really try to study the past for its own sake. In the same way that I think scientists also, want their research to be, in the pursuit of knowledge exclusively, and not necessarily leave themselves open to having their data and their results skewed. And that has a place and is totally valuable. But it just wasn't for me. I was coming into history as a lover of the Civil War. And I think the Civil War is certainly something that is with us every single day as Americans, and something that I think the understanding of helps us navigate our lives and our choices and our communities every single day. And honestly, I think my research as in college into Shaw was also extremely powerful, and into the 54th. I found my experience of researching who Shaw was and how he made his decisions to be very useful on a personal level. I think I saw a lot of myself in him in some ways, not in others, but in some ways. And I learned a great deal from his example. And I think that was really powerful to me, this idea that, not that we're putting historical figures up on a pedestal, I don't think that's a good idea, but certainly that there are things to learn from the past that are not just about how we vote or how we, what choices we make on a very grand scale, but just I think about what kind of people we want to be and how we want to live our lives. And certainly in my experience of talking with members of the general public, I think that has enormous power. So yeah, public history just always appealed to me in a different way than academic history. I think they certainly both have their place and are both important, but I think I was called to be on the public side of things.
For me personally, that challenge of not knowing who's going to walk through the door of your institution on that particular day, or what sort of questions you're going to get. Some people may come into, particularly a Civil War museum, it's obviously a subject that's still with us that people are very passionate about. And people may walk through and they may have, it may be on a personal level where an ancestor served in the 6th Wisconsin, and they have spent their lives researching their ancestor in that particular regiment, or even down to the company level that particular soldier served in. And you get that sort of passion walking into the door, but then you also get people coming into your site that don't know, really have much of a background at all in the Civil War, that may be not really sure what it's all about. They may have little kids kind of tugging at their arm too at the same point. And I always get, my real passion about this is presenting information through our exhibits or interpretation that teaches both of those groups, right? Someone who has that long-standing personal interest or passion, long-standing study in the subject, but then also maybe it's something brand new for this other audience. And you have a limited amount of time in which to instruct both of them. And my personal hope is that when both of those groups, and then the people that fall somewhere in the middle, come to your site, that they're learning something, and that, but maybe they're also inspired to go to the public library and check out a book because this was new information to them and they want to learn more. And you've kind of lit that spark. You're not going to teach them everything in the amount of time that you have with them, but maybe you've opened their eyes to a new way of thinking or a new subject matter, and they take that and want to know more about it when they leave your site. So that's what gets me excited about
Absolutely.
history. And maybe
Absolutely.
it's the same for you.
Also, totally. Freeman Tilden, the father of interpretation, always says that interpretation is not instruction, it's provocation. And I always loved that opportunity to really provoke people and inspire people. And I love what you said about the variety of it, that every day is different. I always kind of talk about interpretation as being like educational improv, because you don't know what's coming through the door, and you've got to be on your feet and ready to meet that guest where they are. And it's challenging and exciting, and every day is different, and I always look forward to that.
Yeah, it's something that we look forward to here when our guests come. Claire, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to teach us really about the process of the PhD, how you're navigating through it, and the choices that you've made in your own personal and professional career that's kind of brought you here. And I think it's really instructive for our viewers to know how they can impact their kids or their grandkids, if they have a love of history, how they can transmit that to them. And at times it may seem like, we're not getting through here. This, this
Right.
this isn't working. But know that you're planting those seeds, and by giving them the opportunity to travel and see these different sites, to get out to these local public history sites is very important. And supporting them in these days, I think, is crucial for all of us at this time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's something I'm extremely passionate about, and always thrilled for the opportunity to talk more about it.
Well, Claire, we look forward to staying in touch with you and bringing you back to the museum for future programming. You did an amazing job the last time you were here talking to us about Robert Gould Shaw and kind of his maturation. I remember that program very well. And good luck with the process. And we look forward to talking with you again in the future.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
Take care, everyone.